Welcome to this series of videos all about tools. I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of different tools that you as an electrician are going to use and are going to need in your trade. Welcome back to another video. Today I have in front of me some tools. These tools are all cutting tools. So we have many tools in our trade, but a lot of times we need to cut things. So these are the tools we might use for that. Let's have a look. So the first tool I have is the hacksaw. This is a tool that we use for cutting steel or any other metal product, whether it be brass, copper, whatever, we would use this. It's not something we use a lot of unless we're trying to cut maybe some bolts, cable tray, or some really thick cable. Sometimes we can get some pretty hefty cable that we might need to cut, and we would use this. Now, there are some advantages to using a hacksaw. It has interchangeable blades. Unlike maybe a timber saw that you might have used when you were back at school, this, you can change the blades so you can put different types of blades on depending on the material you're trying to cut. Now, that brings us to a thing called TPI. TPI is teeth per inch. So the more teeth per inch means the finer the distance between the teeth are, which means the more dense the material is that you can cut. So if you needed to cut stainless steel, then you would have a blade that has a really, really fine TPI so that it can cut that stainless steel. Stainless steel is extremely hard to cut, and you probably find you still break a few blades. Now, if you had to cut something really fairly soft or less dense, then you would use a blade that has a larger TPI. Get that right. Then you would use a blade that has less teeth per inch. So the distance would be further apart. It wouldn't be as fine. So those are two important things you need to keep in mind. So that's how you would choose your blade depending on what it is you're trying to cut. Now, another thing with a hacksaw is obviously you will put the blade on and you'll tension it up. If you get too much tension and it doesn't flex enough, the blade will snap when you're using it. If it's got too much flex, then it's not going to cut properly and you're likely to bend it or, again, possibly break the blade. The other thing is when you're cutting, you have to really make sure that you are cutting it straight. You're not wobbling your arm around. If you wobble around like this, you will break the blade. As apprentices, you are going to find you will be breaking some blades, so make sure you've got a stock of blades in your tool bag so that you can swap them back over when that happens. The best way to get good with a hacksaw is to practice using it. Okay, the next tool I have is this. This is a retractable knife. So if I press the button down here and move it forward, the blade comes out. It's an auto-retracting knife, so if I take my finger off that button now, it retracts back in. Now, these are designed for safety. A lot of places you go to work now will not let you take any knives on site unless it is like this, auto-retracting. Now, they're very, very sharp. They're interchangeable blades. We can take this screw out here, take that apart, and we can swap out the blades, which is quite handy because they do get blunt. They are super sharp. They are like a scalpel, so you've got to be really careful. When cutting with them, a little tip I learned when I was an apprentice, so always cut away from yourself and towards your mate. So the reason being, if you're trying to cut something and you're cutting this way and you slip, it's going to hurt. So we don't want you to get hurt. You don't want to get hurt, so let's not do that. So you'll find though with these knives, the auto-retracting one is really awkward for us as electricians because a lot of times we are trying to cut around cable and it's very hard to keep that blade open. So generally we will use ones that don't auto-retract, which means you need to get into the habit of when you have the blade out, as soon as you finish cutting, push the blade back manually. If you get into that habit, you'll have no problems and you'll always be safe. But if you leave the blade lying around and it's open, then somebody could come and grab it and they can get hurt. So let's move on. Okay, so the next tool I have is a pair of tin snips. Now, tin snips come in 3 different types. They come in a left-hand cut, a right-hand cut, and a straight cut. These ones are a straight cut. They are designed for cutting thin metal. That's why they have the name tin snips. Now, these particular ones, they're not an expensive brand, but these are probably one of the best tin snips I've come across. They have a slightly, very, very slightly serrated edge, and it just makes cutting really, really easy. Now, we would use these a lot for cutting maybe cable tray, or maybe we've got to cut some shim or something we need that might be of some sort of brass or metal or even copper. Very, very handy tool. You probably won't use it a lot, but it's excellent for when you need a tool that will cut that through that steel or that thin metal. Okay, the next tool we have is this one. This looks like some sort of butcher's tool. It is actually called a wall board saw or a plasterboard saw. A lot of times you'll hear us talk about it being a gyprock saw, which is not the correct name. We call it that because gyprock is a brand of plasterboard. So a lot of times you'll find that in the trade where people will talk about certain tools or certain equipment and they'll refer to it as a brand name. Another good example is a Hilti drill. Hilti is just a brand of a drill, right? Or maybe Ramset bolts. There's a whole bunch of them out there that you'll hear people talk about, and they're referring to a brand, not the specific item. So this is a plasterboard saw. It is extremely sharp, it has very, very jagged teeth, and just like I mentioned with the hacksaw, this has a very coarse cut, so the teeth per inch is quite wide, so it has less teeth per inch than, say, another saw. And it is so that it can cut through the gyprock. I said that. It is so it can cut through the plasterboard, because the plasterboard is very, very soft. Now, because of the way plasterboard gets compressed on, it has to be fairly jagged because it's got to kind of almost tear its way through. When we're using this, it does get really, really messy. Plasterboard goes everywhere, so keep that in mind. And when you're keeping these in your bag, just make sure you're putting them somewhere out of the way where you're not going to accidentally grab it and cut yourself or stab yourself with them, because they are quite dangerous. Every electrician should have one of these because we work with plasterboard all the time. All right, the next tool is this. This is a junior hacksaw. So just like our larger version, this is exactly the same, does the same job. Only this is designed for cutting small items. A lot of times we have to cut small bolts or nuts off. Maybe they're rusted onto an old fitting and we have to try and get it off. This is what we would use the junior hacksaw for, because we can get into small spaces and cut quite easily. So nothing much to say here. It's exactly the same as its larger version, but just for smaller jobs. And then we have this interesting looking saw. Some of you will have a hacksaw which actually has this attachment on it. And basically it's just a handle that holds onto a standard hacksaw blade, again, so that you can get into areas that you might not normally be able to get into with the larger frame. So it's just a good little saw. Again, you might use it for cutting bolts off, maybe bits of cable or something, if you have limited space in which to use. And now, obviously, we come back to the most important tool in our toolkit, which is our pliers. I'll mention this quite a few times in different videos. Our pliers have a cutting edge. We use this all the time for cutting our cable, cutting cable ties. So it is a cutting tool along with many other things. And that's it for most of the cutting tools. There are other cutting tools out there that we can buy and use, but really for your toolkit, these are going to be the main things that you will come across in your apprenticeship time and possibly throughout your trade. So that's it.